Good morning, everyone. My name is Christy Wooten. I'm president of the Atlanta Press Club. Thank you for joining us today for our new download series for journalists. Today we will be discussing knowing your rights and how to stay safe while reporting on protests. And we've put together, actually we have been the recipients of a great document that was put together by some of our colleagues, Resources for Journalists in Georgia Covering Protests. And we have with us today Charlotte Norsworthy. She is the president of the Society of Professional Journalists in Georgia. And Willoughby Mariano, she is the president of the Asian American Journalists Association of Atlanta. So welcome to you both and thank you for being here. I think what the format we're going to take today is just to go through some of these tips, stopping after a few minutes and asking for you all to put your questions in the chat function, which is in the panel, the lower part of your Zoom panel. And we will try to answer some questions. Sheena, my colleague, will feed those to us, and we will try to do that after each section. And again, we will also be sharing links in the chat function off to the side on your screen. So look there for links where you can click and see a lot of these tips listed online. So we'll get started. Thanks again, everybody. So what we've put together is we're hoping this can kind of be a guide for working journalists. We will be happy to put this in PDF format and email it to you after the presentation. So reporting during protests, what to take with you. These are some suggested things before you go, what to take with you when you're packing your backpack. Make sure you have a copy of your ID and press credentials with you at all times. We will be coming back to this information as well from the knowing your rights side of things, because there's some important things you need to know about what type of ID and credentials you need to have with you. Portable phone battery is a must, especially if you are using phone as an IFB. If you have a second phone, such as one for work, make sure it's with you and charged. So a lot of people are carrying two phones on this. If you have a first aid kit and know how to use it, definitely bring that with you. Other things to remember when you pack, don't take anything you don't absolutely need. Carry a lightweight bag or backpack and nothing more in terms of additional bags. I know that's hard for photographers because sometimes you have to bring your lenses and extra equipment. So I know that sometimes doesn't apply to your work. Don't carry a lot of cash with you. Gas masks and goggles are recommended. Regular masks, obviously, for fighting COVID-19, but also gas masks in case you come into contact with tear gas or other substances. And learn how to use those masks and goggles before you go. That will help you. We also have Archith. Hi, Archith. He's just joined us as a panelist to give us some insight on how it's been to report on these protests in Atlanta. Okay, so before we get to what to do before you go, does anybody in the panel have any thoughts on this or additional tips, or are there any questions, Sheena, yet from the participants?
No questions yet.
I'll just add in here for those who are freelancers and maybe a little bit more flexible with the type of equipment that you're able to carry with you. Be thinking of maybe creative ways that you can downplay the size and amount of equipment that you're bringing with you. Again, you know, we've seen a lot of really harrowing reports of journalists who have prominently displayed their status as a member of the press, and their equipment has been taken and destroyed or used as weapons against them. And so, you know, this is not meant to say you should not be disclosing the fact that you're a member of the press, but maybe be thinking of more nonchalant pieces of equipment that you can be carrying with you that would still enable you to tell the same story.
That's good to know.
I'll add in real quick to Archith here. Sorry, we had a little password meeting ID issue, so apologies for the slight delay.
No, thank you.
I would say another great tip, someone actually said this to me, they were just out there marching peacefully. They said also have 1 or 2 phone numbers memorized, whether it's your newsroom or someone you need to call, just in case. A lot of us rely on our phones, and if you're doing social media lives or Facebook or Instagram or we're using our phone a lot, and sometimes you might need that number. So have that written down on a card or something like that. And also carry business cards. Sometimes you might not have a present badge or ID, but having a business card is always a helpful thing, especially if you're able to, even as a freelance, you can print those out, or, you know, from Vistaprint or Moo or whatever. So there's like $10. Those definitely help you in terms of if you ever have an issue with law enforcement or anybody like that.
And I would like to add something too. I think clothing is really important, and it's not just dressing comfortably and for the heat. But you know, I have a colleague of mine was hassled during the I guess the attack on the Foot Locker downtown when it was raided by looters because he was wearing a tie and he is white. So appearance matters. It got a little tense. He was surrounded. So be very aware of who you appear to be. He happened to be wearing a tie, you know, and a collared shirt. So be very aware about who you appear to be, and whether or not they might be misunderstandings because of it. I also know my colleague, a colleague who is Black, made sure to wear a big AJC sweatshirt because he did not want to get attacked accidentally by police, and you know, so they had fewer excuses to detain him. Again, none of these will keep you safe, but it's so easy to have a misunderstanding on the streets in a chaotic situation. What you wear matters a lot.
Yeah, we one of our freelancers here in Atlanta, Sean Keenan, recently he went online and ordered one of those big like press vests that you see with all the pockets and for all your goodies. We do have a question from the audience. It's, where do you get a gas mask and goggles?
Your employer, which is, I know they're not universally available. Let's just put it that way. And I think a lot of discussions have to go on between not only freelancers and people who hire them, but staffers, because they are not universally given out. You know, my husband, for instance, who works for Reuters, had combat training basically, or civil disturbance training, and has a lot of equipment. I don't typically cover riots, so I don't.
And I think as far as, I'm not an expert on equipment, but I will say that a lot of things that might suffice, again, we're talking about tear gas here. This is not sort of I mean, tear gas is awful, but in terms of permeability and those kind of things, I think that a lot of this stuff can be ordered online. Just be careful, the quality and you know, what you're getting, and making sure that it's appropriate for use in this situation.
And with regard to goggles, I think that we're in this is sort of an emergency situation. Head out to Lowe's, get something that'll cover your eyes.
Right.
Because, you know, my friend got gassed and hit by rubber bullets out in Minnesota. So, you know, anything that can cover your eyes, even a little bit, heck, swim goggles. If I had nothing else, I would take those. Really just find whatever it is you have around your house if you have to go out there quickly.
We've got people saying Army surplus and military supply stores are good places. And yeah, I saw a couple reporters of definitely freelancers wearing like scuba diving goggles out this weekend. So, and I just wanted to add one tip that I read recently that I never would have thought of. Don't wear your credentials on a lanyard. Wear them on one of those bungee clips, because someone could grab the lanyard to, you know, hurt you or get you out of the way or whatever. So I thought that was a good tip.
Great. If we don't have any other questions right now, are we ready to move on, Sheena?
Yep, I think we're ready.
Okay, great. So here are some tips about what to do before you go to the location where you'll be reporting about the protest. Have a plan and strategy in place before you head out the door. That's important. Anticipate your exit plans. And this is really important because even as we've seen in Atlanta, all the different locations where people have been protesting and where different activities have happened with the police, whether it be in front of CNN or in Buckhead or wherever. Those are very different places, different types of streets and intersections, and you just really need to be familiar with where you plan to be. So you need to ask yourself, are you familiar with the location of this protest? What buildings are nearby, landmarks, good to know. That's important. If you're going with more than one colleague, such as a photographer or producer, make sure you and your colleagues are all on the same page about where to meet, knowing your surroundings, any plan of action that you're going to take, a place to meet up at a certain time if you don't hear from each other or if you get separated. Those are good things to know. More things to do before you go. At least one person in your newsroom should know your whereabouts at all times. If you don't know exactly where you are as you move along, you can check on a locator app such as Google Maps and send a pin to your point person. Familiarize yourself with this tool or one like it beforehand. Also expect to have a signal, connection, and battery issues. Consider taking a mobile Wi-Fi hotspot with you.
Can I interrupt here too?
Sure. Yeah.
Because batteries can run out. I've found it useful to actually have a physical map at times. So please don't underestimate the power of paper.
I like that. I'm a physical map person too. I think that knowing how to read them is important. But does anybody know of any other locator apps that have been useful during this time, or anytime you're doing sort of reporting and need to have your geolocation identifiable to the newsroom? Does anybody have any other tips?
I will just say, if you have an iPhone, it makes it, and something, again, this is sort of something you would need to do beforehand, create a text chain with your points of contact, the team that may be going out with you, maybe if you have photographers going out at the same time as you, whoever your editors are, put them all in one text chain and go ahead and permanently share your location, or at least set a date range for sharing your location. And that way it's constantly sending that information out to your editor. And you don't have to stop and worry about, do I have cell service to send a push pin right now? They can be constantly tracking it, especially if they know where you're going. They can see how you may be moving with crowds, whether your location doesn't match up with where you've been assigned, and whether things start to look fishy, and if they need to try and locate you again and get in touch with you.
That's really good information.
And even with WhatsApp, by the way, I was going to say real quick, if you have an app called WhatsApp, the same with text, there's a location feature on that, and that becomes easier because it actually puts out a map. So I use WhatsApp a lot, because when we're communicating back and forth, and you can hit send location live for 15 minutes and then it disappears. So that way they know that if no one can actually track you the whole time, but they at least know your last point of contact.
And one thing I will add, too, just thinking of the freelancers here who may be sort of party of one is the song that they sing. I would encourage you to lean on other freelancer colleagues and form a plan with them. Even if you don't have a newsroom that's backing you up, you should band together and back each other up. In talking with journalists in the past several days, having witnesses to these sort of events that are happening, especially if they're happening at journalists and directed toward journalists, is just as powerful as a firsthand experience. And so if you find yourself operating alone, I would encourage you to link up with others and form a plan on your own, and that way you can bear witness to what may or may not happen to you in the covering of the protests.
I would add here too that this came to be a really important point. I think when Alyssa Pointer, my colleague at the AJC, was detained, if you watch the video, she, even though she had a giant press pass on, it was obvious she had professional equipment. She, a Black woman, was detained by police. And what was extremely helpful was that colleagues caught it on camera and were there and told police that she was pressed and stayed until she was released. So I think that's the kind of solidarity we need to show out there on the streets. It's dangerous, and we should take care of each other.
And I was going to add to that real quick as well. Thank you, Charlotte and Willoughby. I was going to say, sometimes there are a lot of people that are out there to help. And, I think sometimes we forget we're out there hustling and doing whatever. You can ask someone for a second, hey, can you just watch my tripod, or can you just help me with this? And people are willing to help. I think sometimes we forget we can ask, and if you don't ask, the answer is a no. You know, when we're shooting stand-ups, if we're shooting video or pictures or whatever, sometimes when people are walking, things may fall. So feel free to ask people, but just make that judgment call and knowing who to ask. And people are more than willing to help. There's a lot of people out there giving water, giving, you know, they really want to do people come from a genuine and good place. So I think also, this isn't packing it into your backpack, packing it into your mind, you know, be thankful and be appreciative of those who are out there, because everybody is in it for the right reasons for the most part. So I think just being compassionate, and, you know, you'll definitely, I think that is certainly infectious.
That's good to know. Sheena, do we have any questions or comments from participants?
We had someone suggest to write your phone numbers, important numbers on your arms, or allergies in case you're unconscious. Great idea. And then we've just got a couple people. I said I found a bungee clip for my press pass at Walmart for $1.50. It's in the jewelry section.
Nice.
We've got some people suggesting different cameras, apps. So definitely, if you're not, keep an eye on this chat function. I also linked the Press Fest from an independent seller, so not Amazon. So if y'all want to check out that, just it's all the links are in the chat function right now.
And one thing I will add, just on this, things that you can do before going out. SPJ Georgia is administering sort of these emergency printable press credentials right now, in response to the fact that folks need to equip themselves as fast as possible. And so for our members, which anyone can become a member who's here, all you would have to do is just shoot us an email, and all of this information is on our website and in our coalition's statement. But essentially, again, this isn't something that's going to prevent anything from happening to you, but it may just, for the right law enforcement officer, dissolve an escalating situation and give you an alternate source of ID, photo ID, verifying yourself as official press. So that's another thing that that we're issuing sort of minute by minute as these requests come in. We're sending them right back out. So just another resource for those of you who don't have newsrooms backing you with press credentials.
And the press club is actually doing the same thing. We're prioritizing, we're sending out digital copies, and then if you want a hard copy, you know, just let me know and I'll get that mailed out to you. But
that's great.
Yeah, and the same thing if you're a member and verified journalist or student journalist. I'm really prioritizing the students here. So yeah, anyway.
Great.
And I think also sort of adding to what Sheena was saying, you know, we all have some kind of equipment, whether it's a phone, whether it's a camera, anything. And if you see a fellow journalist, I was there Monday when we saw Alyssa, you know, the cops that detained her right by the interstate. Speak up. I mean, and a bunch of us were there, you know, somebody was recording, somebody was videotaping. That's all proof. We can't necessarily blame someone, but once we have that video and audio, and you know, we took that and asked the governor, what do you think about this for press safety in Georgia? If you have the ability to record it, do it, and of course speak up and tell them that, you know, they're press, they're journalists, they're reporters. Yes, they might be your competition, but they're also, you know, your fellow colleagues. So it's important to voice your opinion and say it there before it gets out of hand.
That's good. All right, I think we're ready to move on to the next section. What to do during the protests as you're reporting. So here's some tips for that. First of all, make sure you are constantly aware of your surroundings. We touched on this about in the other section. Just make sure you are aware of landmarks, places where you are planning to exit the area if you have to. Just be constantly aware of that. Also pay attention to the changes in the mood of the crowd. So if the people around you are suddenly start running or pushing or other things, or loud noises or any sort of pyrotechnics or fireworks or other things or smoke, those are all signals that something is changing in the crowd. So some of these may be obvious and some of them may be a little more nuanced in terms of what's happening. So just pay attention to the mood of the crowd. If you anticipate that police will start dispersing a crowd of protesters before curfew, for example, make sure you have a plan in place as to what your next move will be. Where are you going to head after that? Know that in advance and communicate that with the team and your point person in the newsroom as you can. Avoid wandering into the crowd, especially if you are on your own. And we'll get to some more of this on the next slide about choosing your location to report from. And I know this is different for reporters and photographers because sometimes both need to be in the mix and both need to also have that sort of view from afar to see what's happening with the whole event. So focus on what you want to film in that moment, what you need to gather and what you need to show. If you can do it from a safe spot, like an elevated position or off to the sidelines, opt for that. If you have to be in the crowd, again, just be very aware of the mood of the crowd as you go. Get what you need and move on. Do not pick up anything thrown by protesters or police. It could be a hot object, it could be dangerous or unfamiliar weapon. It could be something that would detonate. You just don't know. So those are, I think, good tips. Let's see what else we've got. Yeah, so we've got some resources coming up. I wanted to pause for questions though before we get to that. So what to do during protests. And I'm hoping that our participants are gonna have a lot of input. If anybody's been in Atlanta in the past week at any of the locations where protests have happened, if you wanna share your experiences, this will be a really good time to chime in. So I'll let everybody take it away. Sheena, do we also have questions for this section?
No, not yet.
I
No
have
questions, no comments yet.
I have something I could add, actually.
Yes.
So my members and I, we talked a couple days ago on Tuesday evening just to get take the pulse of, people who have been, on this story. And one tactic that they're noticing and that I had heard about was that sometimes police are corralling people here in Atlanta and they end up sort of in with access points blocked off, so that even if protesters want to leave, journalists want to leave a particular area, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to leave. So I think, if you could just keep an eye out for that. I don't have a good way to defend against that, aside from always knowing where the exit is or where a potential exit might be. But I wanted to make you aware because I think that's a tactic that's really potentially dangerous to reporters.
And one thing I'll add on that is just making sure that at any, after a certain amount of time that you sort of zoom out on the altitude and just assess what's happening. I think journalists oftentimes, especially photographers, but even, I've done this as well, where I'm sort of, deep in my notebook, not paying attention, and I'm not recognizing when situations are changing. And that can be situations within the crowd or within law enforcement and these sort of tactics. And so I think making sure that you're taking moments to check in with and assess the situation, sort of zoom out from your job for a moment and see what's changing and how that may be impacting your safety, but also the story.
And I think from being out there, a couple of days this week for most of us, right? I think you want to sort of get as many angles as you can, at least from a broadcasting perspective, right? If literally put the tripod as high as you can and just show those wide shots, and you want to be able to capture as many of those things and be able to move quickly with the crowd or anticipate where they're going. And we got to a point where we saw some of the cops arresting people. Our cameras were rolling. We got shots of people being arrested, but we also asked the cops, why are you arresting them? They don't give us an answer. And I took those questions to Atlanta Police Department and we asked the governor. So I think being able to ask the questions, not only about the protest, but what's happening there. So you may come in with hey, I'm going to cover this peaceful protest. And that's how it started on Monday at City Hall, went all the way around. Some people went to the interstate. Then they came back and we were trapped. We were blocked there for an hour, more than an hour, I think. And my car was parked at the Capitol, like right outside the Capitol, because we were interviewing the governor. We couldn't even get to the car. The police, and it's not all the cops, some of them were like, you can't go there. And it's like, well, your car's parked there. How do you want me to go there? So you kind of evaluate that situation. I went around the block. We shot some other video. You kind of have to just report and see as it is. But I think be polite, but be firm. And you can always be, be smart with your judgment. I was in the corner by the Capitol. The National Guard started coming in. And of course, you're trying to step out of the shot. Then the cop is like, why are you coming so close to me? And I was like, well, listen, I'm just trying to move away so I don't block them. I think just communicating, effectively is important, because everybody is nobody knows what's going to happen. Everyone's concerned. So I think just being really mindful of I think the first point that says, be aware of your surroundings, every way, left, right, up, down, and hear what's happening to you.
Yeah, I'll move back to that slide so we can see that again. And we'd like to welcome Ellen Lopez joining us as a panelist as well.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
We were just talking about what to do during protests and sharing some tips from that, and talking about the importance of being aware of your surroundings, and paying attention to everything going around you, having an exit strategy, those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things, is having an exit strategy before you even go out to cover these protests, and being familiar about where you're going to be and looking at that map beforehand, and then communicating that to your entire team so that everyone is on the same page. I found that a lot of times, you might have a strategy in place, an exit strategy in place, but you haven't communicated that to your producer or to your photog. And so I think that is as important as having an exit strategy.
That's great. Sheena, do we have any comments or links or thoughts from the participants?
Robin Kemp has a good suggestion here. She says, always be looking out for strategic cover, just like a hard wall or something. Don't get trapped between the crowd and glass storefronts, which, as we saw Friday night, good idea.
Great. Any other comments?
Nope.
Okay, we'll move on. So in your panel, there's at the top of the panel, before we started the session, we entered some links for websites that have comprehensive coverage about protection and safety while covering protests. So it probably goes a little more in depth than what we've provided on the slides. So this one is from the International News Safety Institute, and the link is on your side panel there. That's a good one to check out. Another resource, Pointer did 23 guidelines for journalists to safely cover protests. That was updated on June 1st. Again, that's a really good comprehensive list, but also written out very clearly and simply, similar to the way we've done these slides here, so that you can get through it really quickly and learn something. That's a good resource. And then we're coming up on talking about the rights part of this. And we have a document that was created by University of Georgia School of Law and their First Amendment group there about knowing your rights. And these are tips for journalists covering protests. Some of these we've kind of already talked about, the protection aspect of things like clothing and what to bring with you and where you'll be reporting from and making sure the newsroom knows where you are. This kind of covers the same thing, but from the rights perspective. So what to do if you're in a situation where your rights are being violated, where you're being detained, arrested, or something like that. And again, this is not comprehensive legal advice. This is just a document prepared by the School of Law. So we wanted to kind of make that available to you and just go through some of those aspects. So again, we're going to start at the beginning again about what to take with you, but from the rights side. This has been touched upon already, making sure that you have a device that you can record with, video and photograph, especially now in the digital age, that's usually your phone. This is helpful in case you need to document any interactions with the police or any other video recorded encounters, so you have your own evidence of what transpired. Another thing is your ID, making sure that you have a correct ID, not just a lanyard or some sort of press ID, but your government issued ID. And these government issued IDs obviously are usually your state driver's license that's not expired, or a passport card that's not expired. I don't know that you should take your full passport with you. Maybe a photocopy of your passport or a passport card, which is a smaller version of your passport, is good. If you're arrested and the police can't identify you, you will be fingerprinted and positively identify before you can be released, which might prolong your detention. So that's something good to know. Make sure you have your ID. Again, your press credentials are great to have. These can be paper, laminated, digital. Just be aware that if you do use a digital document, you won't have access to it if you're separated from your phone. So consider like printing out a hard copy of your digital ID and putting it in your back pocket of your pants or something like that, just to make sure that you've got your ID with you. And you can also do this with your state ID or passport. You know, carry photocopies in your pocket in case your wallet or your backpack or some other things that you brought along with you you get separated from your items, lost, stolen, whatever. A police issued press ID can grant you the right to cross police lines at the direction of the on-site officers. So I don't have personal information about police issued press IDs. Does anybody know about those and how they work or have any experience with that? Okay. So that's something to investigate for sure, depending on what you're reporting on.
My understanding on that is that I think folks have maybe used government issued press IDs specifically in covering things like the Capitol, but I know that in Georgia they're not necessarily like police issued government IDs.
Right.
Press don't necessarily exist.
Yeah, in DC, I mean, when I was stationed in DC for a while for CNN, you know, you have government issued press credentials, but I haven't seen anything like that here in Georgia.
Yeah, good to know. Okay, and then we're going back through the press attire again. We've talked about this, something that clearly demonstrates you're a member of the press. Somebody mentioned, I think Willoughby mentioned the AJC sweatshirt or something that can identify you if you're affiliated, especially with a well-known institution or publication. A hat or shirt with the word press on or the press vest might help you out there too. We talked about not bringing a lot of cash with you, but this says if you're arrested, you may have to post bond to be released. The offenses with which journalists are typically charged could carry a bond ranging from approximately $150 to $600, depending on the location of the arrest and the charge. So I think that that's something to look into and maybe figure out beforehand and how you would handle that. We've talked about this before again, a witness and a phone number. So in the event of a police encounter, having a witness present, you know, working alongside a colleague, friend, or family member to observe and record what happens and report to others that you've been arrested might protect you from abuse and lengthy detention, could protect you from those. Carry or memorize ahead of time the phone number of someone to call. We also talked about putting this on your arm. Make sure that it's somebody who will likely answer. You may not have access to your phone to retrieve a number or send a text. So that's good to know. Any thoughts on that before we move on to more?
We do have a question. Someone asked, what should freelancers wear to demonstrate that they are members of the press? And I can answer this real fast, but you can, if you want to scroll back up, I linked to a press vest that you can wear. There's actually quite a few options, even if you just Google it. So sorry, guys, sorry.
I'll also add, Sheena and I mentioned this earlier, but SPJ Georgia and the Atlanta Press Club are administering press credentials for freelancers, all journalists, but especially for freelancers who may not have access to sort of official documentation of their official press status. And so these administered press credentials can be digital. We invite you to both print them out, have multiple copies of them. You can take them to, you know, Kinko's or whatever and get them laminated. So we can put that link in here as well. And that's an additional sort of documented resource for you.
Okay.
And I actually, this is Sheena again. I saw a really neat tip recently of having the business cards, like Archith was saying, have business cards printed up, and then on the back, just have it say like reporting for with a blank line, and then you could write in Washington Post or, you know, whoever you're on assignment for. I thought that was a neat tip too.
Yeah, I'll definitely add that depending on what sort of interaction you have with law enforcement, digital press credentials printed out on a piece of paper, press credentials, they can take them or leave them. But ironically, in the event of our former SPJ Georgia president, Haston Willis, he had a digital press credential from the Washington Post in his phone that was confiscated unlawfully by police. And what ended up getting him released was a business card in his wallet, ironically. So the idea that anyone can forge digital, physical business card press credentials is very much so the case, but it's kind of hilarious that what may not work for one may work for the other. So take that as you will.
And really, adding to that, Sheena and Charlotte, I was going to say, these are happening day in and day out, as we know. Like, you may, if you don't have a business card already and you're not able to get one mailed or whatever, you could literally go to an Office Depot or an Office Max and get it printed there now. Also, if you can, ask your HR or your manager to have a letter and then have them email and print it out and keep a copy of that folded in your wallet. I know that a lot of media organizations are able to do that, whether it's for press safety or if you're out there covering past curfew. So that's another easy way to do it in addition to keeping it in your phone. I'm always like, have extra, have a business card, have a screenshot in your phone, have whatever you can to make sure that, like, I use sometimes my, I have the parking pass, the Georgia Building Association downtown, and that basically has a picture ID and it says who I report. So any of that stuff, obviously you don't want to take a whole lot, but the more you have, the better. And if if time is of the essence, certainly ask your manager or HR and run to FedEx office and print something out. And as Sheena said, put those phone numbers in there. Keep a copy of that letter in your wallet first.
Thank you, Arjun. Okay, some things to remember in the field as far as your rights. You have a right to be present in public spaces, but not a right to trespass. You have no special or additional rights beyond those afforded to general members of the public in this regard. When you are lawfully present in any public space, you have the right to photograph and video record anything in plain view, including federal buildings and the police, as long as you do not interfere with a police officer doing their job. If officers issue a dispersal order, they must provide a reasonable opportunity to comply, including sufficient time and a clear, unobstructed exit path. They must provide clear and detailed notice, including how much time you have to disperse, the consequences of failing to disperse, and what exit route you can follow before you can be arrested or charged with unlawful assembly. You may request this information of them. So I think this is a good one to maybe talk about, because we've touched upon, what if there's not a clear exit path? What if there's, are they giving a reasonable opportunity to comply? Did you hear the orders? Were they using a bullhorn, or were there just, was it within a few feet range where an officer made a comment? So I don't know if anybody has any experience on this end with it, but, or anything to add with that. I think that those are good points.
I think that an experience of talking to Haston about his detainment, police definitely take advantage of folks who don't know their rights. And that's where abuses tend to happen. So I think it is very valuable to know, like the back of your hand, at what point your rights are being violated. And in the event of Haston, where his phone, where his press credentials were located, was confiscated, the pen he was using to take notes was confiscated, that can't happen. But that's something that in the heat of the moment and being sort of vaguely familiar with where his rights were being violated, he wasn't quite sure. And so I think that definitely understanding when there are clear lines, that will equip you to be able to potentially get yourself out of escalating situations.
Good to know. Sheena, any comments from the audience on this?
No, we're good to continue.
Okay, great. What to do if the police stop you. Stay calm, keep your hands visible, and do not resist. Record the encounter or have a witness record the encounter. Notify the arresting officer that you are a member of the press and present your press credentials if you have them. If the situation allows for negotiation, ask the police where they would like you to stand. That will still allow you to engage in news gathering. If the situation does not allow for negotiation, ask if you are being detained and if you are free to leave. If the police ask for your consent to search or begin searching, tell them, I do not consent to a search. It can be dangerous and illegal to physically resist a search, but you should not verbally consent, according to this document. Police officers may not confiscate or demand to view your photographs, video, or reporting notes without a warrant. This is generally true even after police have arrested you and seized your phone. If you consent to show the police even one photograph on your phone, this may constitute consent for them to view all of your photographs and videos. Police officers may not delete data under any circumstances. So any comments on this? Because I think there's a lot in here, especially about the right for them to view your photographs and videos. If you allow them to view one, this may constitute viewing the whole camera roll. Any experiences on this end? Sheena, any questions?
No, not yet.
Okay, we'll catch up with that as it comes along.
I can add to this real quick, and I'm glad that none of us have that experience, and unfortunately what happened to Alyssa and to Hasten, it's unfortunate. But the one thing that we did do during this time is because if you're seeing other people get arrested, of course, if it's a journalist, you can certainly record and ask where they're going to jail, where they're being held, and what the charges are for, and then put in a follow-up request with more than likely, at least in Atlanta, the APD. And we've emailed them daily how many people have been arrested, the charges, and what for, and sort of cross-verified that. And if you see someone get arrested, or if you are, a lot of the people that we've talked to, we're getting the officer's name and their badge number, and if their friend or their witness is writing that down. So those are other important elements, because there's obviously so many people out there. You also want to know who it is. More than likely it's APD, but the more specific and details you're able to either keep or have someone else keep, it makes it easier when they reach back to you. And we handed out all our business cards to those witnesses to follow up and help get them answers.
And let me add, there are a lot of agencies in town that don't normally do this sort of thing, so they might not be aware of your rights either. It was the Department of Natural Resources that detained Alyssa. So you might be dealing with a lot of people who are not familiar with the area, or officers who are not familiar with the area and not familiar with dealing with the press on a day-to-day basis.
That's a very good point.
And in saying that these encounters that you may have with law enforcement that's not typically equipped to handle situations of civil unrest or daily interactions with press in a breaking news fashion may be very frustrating because of that. I've seen and experienced a lot of pointing fingers to other law enforcement agencies, and there not being a collaborated effort in how they're going about interacting with press. And so just be prepared for the fact that these interactions could be very frustrating, and they may not be able to provide these answers to you because they weren't properly trained or equipped on how to answer your questions.
And to add to what Charlotte is saying, I think one of the things that it's important to remember is just to continue to stay calm. I think it's really hard in the moment to be calm because of all the chaos that's around you at that time. And I think it's easy to understand, well, I'm going to remain calm, but then you're in that situation, and perhaps in that heated situation, you don't know how to react. And perhaps you react in a way that might not be perceived by officers or law enforcement that you are calm and that you're abiding by what the officer is asking of you. So I think it's really important to just remain calm. If the officer's not giving you his name and his badge number, then don't, you ask, just remain calm. At the end, it will all resolve itself, but don't get frustrated. It is easy to get frustrated during those situations, so just try to remain as calm as you can.
Thank you. Anything else, Sheena? Okay.
Nope. We're good to continue.
And sorry, we're just reading off of this, but I think each point is so important. I hate to miss anything, and I think we're hitting on some really good points. So bear with us. We have, I think, 2 more slides, and then we will have a little more room for discussion before we round out the hour.
I do want to add one thing.
Yes.
I reposted all the links in the chat function. They were in there, but only the panelists could see them. So links are there now, and everyone can see them. And we're going to be sending all of this out via email to all our participants. So you will get a copy of all this, and this is being recorded. So don't worry if you miss some information, we will get it to you.
Thank you.
And I was also going to add to that real quick, Sheena, just real quick in terms of communication. I know even after you're done, I think there was an earlier slide that we talked about letting people know where you are, what you're done. But pretty much as soon as we were done, I called my bosses and told them, this is what happened, this is the situation, this is what we're going to do. And just having at least one person know what has happened. They don't know what's going on, and I think it's up to us to communicate, exactly what happened in that timeline. And why that's important is, for example, we asked the governor, what day is it? Tuesday. And he said, what time? Where did this happen? What was the location? So having, if you don't remember that, write it down. So when you follow up, you have the specific details. And if it just makes you more credible, and you're able to pinpoint, because now when we get the reports from APD, I don't need to look through all of it. I only need to look at the window between 3 and 5. So again, going back, just really paying attention to those location, those specific details of where you are and what happened. And maybe even getting a number or two from some of those folks that you did interview so you can follow up with them or with them.
Great. Thank you, Archie. Now we're up to what to do if the police do arrest you. Again, stay calm. We talked about this. Do not resist. Keep your hands visible. The place to challenge the arrest is in court. Record the arrest or have a witness record the arrest. Find out which law enforcement agency or jurisdiction is arresting you. Again, it may not always just be the police. There are often multiple agencies operating at the same location: city police, county sheriff, state patrol, National Guard, or different departments, as we said, and they each detain and process arrestees differently. Being able to correctly identify the law enforcement agency or jurisdiction to your editor or attorney will definitely expedite your release. You have the right to remain silent. At most, give your name, address, age, and the name of the media company, if any, which with you are affiliated. So those are good tips. I'm going to move on to the next one. And then here's what to expect after you are arrested. And this process varies depending on where you're arrested and by which agency. If you have provided proof of your identity and your identity has been verified and you have indicated you are able and willing to post a required bond, you may be released from the government holding facility with a date for a future court appearance. If you cannot or refuse to post bond, you will likely be taken to the local county courthouse for arraignment. If you're arrested over a weekend or when the courthouse is not otherwise in operation, you may not be arraigned until normal business hours. At the arraignment, you will be represented either by an attorney of your choice or a public defender, and you will enter a plea. If you plead not guilty, consult with your attorney about the importance of requesting a jury trial. If you are not released from custody before being arraigned, you will likely be taken to government holding facility after arraignment to retrieve your property, and you will either pay the required bond to secure your immediate release or be held pending trial. Once released, you may request records relating to your arrest under Georgia's Open Records Act. And we've got some links here. Sheena, I don't know if we can grab those off of here and put those in the chat function as well. We will definitely include them in this PDF that we will send you. So I don't know if anyone on our Zoom today has been arrested or has witnessed an arrest of a fellow journalist. If you want to, eyewitness, if you want to give us that information or things that you can legally share with us, we're happy to hear those stories, or if there's any comments from the panelists on some of these tips.
Almost arrested a fair amount of times, though I'm fortunate to not have been arrested. And I think it's, honestly, this comes down to how people perceive you. I kind of look like a Pokemon character. I'm short and non-threatening. So if, I think it's important to look like somebody who's not arrestable to avoid it, because it's just, there's no end of trouble if you get arrested. You don't know when you're going to be able to call your editor. You don't know how police are going to treat you once you're in custody. You don't know where you're going. So please, God, don't get arrested.
One thing I'll also add is in situations like this, if you find yourself not being anything more than detained, which being detained means they don't have anything to hold you for, and eventually you'll be released. It's not a full-blown arrest and charges and all of that, etc. But one thing I will say is find someone, again, something you can do before you go out, find someone outside of the newsroom space who you can also tell and also share your location with, and also maybe be your emergency contact if you don't have one already sort of pre-chosen in your mind. For situations like this, in the event you actually do need to post bail and you don't have an editor who can come and bail you out. Having someone outside of this scene and being at the ready and being accessible via phone and being waiting to hear from you is going to be very useful if you find yourself in a precarious spot like this.
And to add to what Charlotte says, remember your phone numbers. I mean, you're not going to have, possibly not going to have your phone there. So remember those numbers, your emergency contacts, remember that phone number, and at least have 2 numbers on the top of your mind that you have memorized.
Sheena,
Yeah, I
go
can
ahead.
share an experience. I, thank God, have never been arrested, but I have had reporters be arrested, and this was actually when we were all students. And I just want to go back to something Art just said earlier, is stick by your fellow press people. I had a reporter, she was a photographer, arrested, and she was with the AJC people, and they were just like, yeah, we don't know. They knew she was press. They knew she was a student. And even after, and then they took a photo of her being arrested, published it with a caption calling her a protester. I emailed them and said, no, she's not a protester. She was a member of the press. And it just stick by your fellow reporters, because that was really disheartening, especially for a student. So just wanted to put that out there. And then I do have some comments if there's no one, if none of the other panelists want to add to that. I do have some comments from the audience.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So Robin Kemp, she had a great idea. For Stop the Bleed training, check shooting ranges. She says there's some great training at Stoddard's in Midtown. And then we have, Charlotte, good idea, the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press legal hotline. I think SPJ National has a legal hotline. I'm a member of the Native American Journalists Association. I know we have a legal hotline. So there's probably a lot of those that your respective organizations could give you. I'm sure GFAF has something. Let's see. We have a suggestion. When detained, keep breathing. You are entering a process akin to a trip to the DMV. Prepare for a long process. Stay patient and calm, even if it is frustratingly slow. And then we have 2 questions. I'm going to go first. Can you explain a bit more about posting bond? How do you go about being prepared for that? If anyone has an answer for that.
My understanding, and again, this is coming from someone who's never had to bail someone out or post bond myself, but my understanding in preparing these tip sheets in the past week is cash is key, or if you don't feel comfortable carrying that recommended amount of cash earlier in this tip sheet on your person, then again, maybe having that point of contact, emergency contact who's ready at the phone, you can give them the cash that says, hey, this should be enough should I call you from jail and need you to come and bail me out. Cash is what I also, I think, saw a comment about cash versus debit cards. I think cash is the way. And so maybe if you don't feel comfortable, again, carrying that level of cash on you, maybe giving that emergency cash to someone you trust, and they can come and bail you out.
Good to know. Thank you.
We have one other question, and this is a really good one. This is from Bryce at Georgia State. There has been a lot of discussion about protesters not wanting to be identified in photos because of police state retribution. In the event that this leads to a conflict with the protester, any advised methods for de-escalation and or ensuring those in your immediate space that you take ethics seriously as a journalist? Has anyone had to deal with that?
Not during these protests, but I've had to deal with situations like this fairly often in the past, and this is hard. My goal is always to de-escalate, and what I've said in the past that hasn't worked, and it might not work, or that has worked rather, and it might not work for you, but is that, hey, how people need to know about this. This is America. People need to know about how you're being treated. We got to get word out there, and that's my job. So please let me take your photograph, or please let me, let me use your name. And if, it might not work now. I mean, the tide is sort of turned on that because of a lot of suspicion that Black Lives Matter protesters have been, targeted because they were photographed by police. So I mean, you are legally in your right, but it's impossible. It's you just have to de-escalate, because I don't think anyone wants a bad relationship with folks who are around them in a chaotic situation.
Mm-hmm. And I think that that's important, is having empathy in these conversations. I think oftentimes, and again, I haven't had to experience de-escalating a situation in this specific context, but in previous Black Lives Matter protests and other immigrant rights protests, or just protests that involve folks that may be compromised in some fashion if their identity is photographed and displayed somewhere. Empathy oftentimes goes further, and stopping for a moment and having a nice, calm conversation with them and explaining why you're there and what your goals are. If things escalate, of course, knowing the fact that you do have the legal right to photograph them in a public space, there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. Sometimes folks get kind of mad about that. So, because at that point, the conversation turns clinical. And so you may just need to sort of use your judgment and use your interviewing expertise to sort of feel out how that person may better understand where you're coming from, and then mutually agree maybe to either part ways, leave each other alone, or maybe they will come to understand where you're coming from after that conversation.
Thank you.
I also was going to add real quick, in terms of video and things that we show, at least from a broadcast perspective. For example, we had a conversation in our newsroom about this. It was the Ahmaud Arbery trial, and the hearing, and even the video that we show. So one of our journalists brought up a very good point. We don't need to keep showing that same video over and over again, or talk about protests when we talk about that, because there weren't any protests for that for the hearing. So if you want to say, being mindful of that and not showing things that don't make sense. Showing video from Atlanta of protesters marching and then putting this in is sometimes out of context. So I think having those conversations with our newsroom, there was there was a station in Nashville, and they actually went on Facebook and addressed this, and I shared it on my Facebook. It was the CBS affiliate. They basically had two different journalists post pictures about people arrested from the protest. The headline writing also was very, perhaps implicit racism. The first one talked about, we showed a picture of a Black man, and it said, "This convicted felon is the second man to be arrested." And the one on the right had a different, much more softer wording. So it's just about making sure that whatever your newsroom standards are, and reaching out to those people, your bosses, your managers, your executive producers, so that we are ourselves not making those mistakes when we're covering this historic event.
Thank you. Well, we've reached the top of the hour, and I just want to say thank you to everyone who participated, especially our panelists, Charlotte, Willoughby, Archith, and Elwin. and to Sheena, my colleague, for helping. Thanks, everybody. We hope this was helpful for you. The Atlanta Press Club has a lot of upcoming events. If you want to check our website at atlantapressclub.org. We also want to hear from you about which events, especially in these times, are helpful to you as a journalist, especially as a journalist in Atlanta. So just send those to info@atlpressclub.org. Any suggestions for events, webinars, anything that would be helpful to you as a journalist in our city. Thanks again, everybody. Be safe out there, and we will make sure that everyone who registered for the event, we have your email. We'll send you a PDF of the slideshow today. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Be
Bye.
safe.
Stay
Thank you, guys.
safe.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Sheena.